This is RT International. We're going to take you to the Russian Black Sea resort of Sochi to show you what's happening there right now. What you can see is the US Secretary of State, John Kerry. You can see Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, for sure. The US Secretary of State is in Russia for his first meeting since 2013. What's happening right now, though, is that both America and Russia's top diplomats are to lay flowers at a memorial dedicated to the soldiers who lost their lives during the Second World War. As you'll know if you've been watching RT International over the past few days, it's been a major, significant anniversary here, the 70th anniversary of the victory over Nazism. Because at the time, on Saturday, no top officials agreed to come to the main events, but as you can see now, John Kerry is taking time to pay tribute to the fallen Soviet troops during this rare trip to Russia. Both diplomats now approaching the memorial to collect the wreaths before laying them in tribute. A sign that no matter what today's political arguments may be, there are, of course, some things that should never be forgotten. A few moments silent tribute from the two diplomats. As I say, the visit itself by John Kerry, it's pretty rare. The last time he was in Russia was 2 years ago. That was before the start of the crisis in Ukraine, which marked a turning point for relations between Russia and the United States. Other dignitaries now laying single flowers at the lit memorial in Sochi on Russia's Black Sea coast. Well, let's talk about the significance of this visit by John Kerry, because after this tribute to the fallen of the Second World War, there will then be business to attend to, as well as talks with Foreign Minister Lavrov. There will also be a meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Our man in Sochi covering this trip for us is RT's Igor Piskunov. Let's join him now. Igor, thanks for joining us back on the programme. As I mentioned, significant visit for both Russia and the United States here. But as we've been saying all morning, since the turnaround in relations between Russia and the United States after what happened in Ukraine, there have been a lot of harsh words from John Kerry directed towards Russia. What are we expecting from this visit?
Well, true. John Kerry was and still is quite critical of Russia for its policies on Ukraine, and a lot has been said by the U.S. Secretary of State, and frankly, some of these things won't ease the negotiations. And we know that besides the Iranian nuclear program, Syria and Yemen, the conflict in Ukraine is planned to be discussed. So there's clearly a lot of attention, including in international media, focused at Kerry's visit. Plus, tensions are really high between Russia and the United States right now. And it's also not very often that officials on such different levels, I mean, of course, the presidential level and the level of the Secretary of State meet. Last time Vladimir Putin and John Kerry met was all the way back in May 2013. But still, diplomatic sources say they do expect the U.S. Secretary of State to suggest a fresh view on the standoff over the Ukrainian conflict. Now, considering Lavrov, they're also supposed to meet, the Russian foreign minister, with John Kerry, their relationship is, well, relatively positive. They always meet at various forums. They hold one-on-one meetings on key international issues. Sergei Lavrov himself said that they have a good relationship with John Kerry, adding that they don't have to smile and joke all the time to show it, but still, sometimes they do.
My other right there. Then you can start. Are you optimistic that we'll get it done?
I'm not paid to be optimistic. You know.
Thank you, everybody, very much.
We're not paid enough to be optimistic. Must be here.
We are already at the presidential residency here in Sochi, where Putin's meeting with Kerry is planned to take place. So, of course, we'll be closely monitoring the events here and we'll be bringing you all the latest details.
Indeed, a lot of business to attend to, Igor, over the coming hours in those meetings. Some things they agree on, some things they don't. But what I suppose is heartening for some is that despite all of today's politics, that they still found time to honour the dead from World War II. Igor Piskunov in Sochi, thanks very much. We'll come back to you later. Next this hour, former CIA officer turned whistleblower Jeffrey Sterling has been sentenced to 3.5 years in prison. The ruling has already been condemned by other whistleblowers.
This is just the most recent casualty of President Obama's unprecedented war on whistleblowers.
Sterling was found guilty of passing classified information to a New York Times journalist. He revealed that the US government was secretly planning to stall Iran's nuclear program by feeding Tehran misleading blueprints. Sterling received 42 months, despite the government asking for a 20-year sentence. RT's Manuel Rapallo reports from outside the court where the trial took place.
It was an emotional day here inside this Virginia courthouse. Jeffrey Sterling was convicted by a jury back in January. We heard that sentencing today, that sentencing of 42 months and an additional 2 years of supervised release. Jeffrey Sterling did get a chance to speak before the judge, thanking the court for their courtesy, thanking the judge for allowing Sterling to attend his brother's funeral, his brother being a former Marine. Now, I want to point to the fact that the prosecution throughout the course of this trial went on and painting Jeffrey Sterling as this disgruntled employee, this disgruntled CIA employee, using words like traitor, using words like liar, words like selfish. And they did a good job of convincing the jury to convict Sterling on all counts. Now, we do have to wait and see when Jeffrey Sterling is going to begin his sentence. But again, just to reiterate, 42 months in prison with an additional 2 years of supervised release.
Well, the New York Times journalist who Sterling passed the information to is James Risen. In 2006, he published a book called State of War, and it was based on Sterling's leak. Risen was then involved in a 2-year battle with the Obama administration, facing imprisonment for refusing to testify in Sterling's case. The prosecution eventually backed down, saying Risen wouldn't be compelled to reveal his sources. Well, RT spoke to the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist last year.
Obama administration has cracked down on more whistleblowers and prosecuted more whistleblowers and targeted more journalists than any other administration in the past. And so that record kind of speaks for itself.
Well, since Barack Obama took office, there have been 8 prosecutions under the Espionage Act, but that's more than double the number under all previous presidents since the law came in almost 100 years ago. Retired NSA official Kirk Weber says the government is sending a clear message to journalists and whistleblowers.
We know the government does not like people in the intelligence community talking to journalists. They have much to hide, some of it legitimate, much of it not. Much of the classifications that the government puts on documents is because it contains embarrassing, not truly sensitive information in terms of keeping secrets that otherwise would affect the national security. So we have a government controlling classification, using it for its own convenience to hide its mismanagement, to hide its misuse of power, and that kind of thing. And so I think that it's meant to send a message to journalists and whistleblowers: don't do it, or we will hammer you.
Reporters working in the White House press corps also complain about the government's attitude. A recent poll shows half of them think Obama dislikes the media, and 63% have never even got to ask the president a question at a news conference. These concerns are echoed by their colleagues from the Society of Professional Journalists. They've written a letter to President Obama complaining about the politically driven suppression of news and information about federal agencies. We spoke to Catherine Foxhall, who was one of those who signed the letter about what the group is unhappy with.
They forbade any of their employees to speak to a reporter unless they first went through the Public Information Office or the Public Affairs Office or whatever it might be called in any particular agency. Things are being obscured or covered up. We believe there's been a very deliberate blockage of certain inquiries because people within the agencies are not comfortable answering them.
More news ahead. We're across that visit of John Kerry to Russia, plus also Greece repays another whopping chunk of its debt just ahead of the deadline. But it's left a €750 million hole in Athens' budget, with unrest on the capital streets amid fears of a default. More on that shortly. Also, NASA is offering $29,000 to anyone who can figure out a way to get astronauts safely to Mars, avoiding deadly space radiation, as they simply don't know how to do it themselves. To the troubled Balkans in Central Europe now, where a court in Macedonia has charged 30 people with terrorism following a deadly shootout between police and an armed gang in the north of the country this weekend. The clashes erupted after police conducted a raid in the town of Kumanovo. More than 20 people were killed in that operation. Police say most of the gang are ethnic Albanians from neighbouring Kosovo. The unrest has added more instability to the internal political situation in the country. Macedonia's capital saw a week of protests over accusations that it covered up the murder of a young man in 2011. Protesters clashed with police in Skopje, injuring almost 40 officers. The murder allegation was made by an opposition leader, citing recorded conversations. The government has dismissed the accusations. Political analyst Sergej Trifkovic believes the unrest in Macedonia is being stirred up from outside.
Macedonia has become very important to the United States recently because of Bulgaria's refusal to accept the South Stream project. And now if the Russian pipeline goes across Turkey to the Greek-Turkish border, the only way it can reach Central Europe would be across Macedonia and then the old path as originally suggested. And this is something the Americans don't want. What we've seen in recent days is really a warning to the government in Skopje not to even think about hosting the new Turkish pipeline, the replacement for the South Stream.
The spectre of Germany's past is being raised by increasingly popular far-right marches in the country. We report on the latest big rally and turnout, plus other stories, after this quick break.